Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored with Steve Taplin.
Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored, where tech leaders drop the filters and just tell it like it is. I'm your host, Steve Taplin, a serial technology entrepreneur, a guy who's launched 30 companies, failed at 20 of those, but scaled 10 to success. And that roller coaster of a journey is what my book's about, called Fail Hard, Win Big. And this is where I teach you how to turn failures into your biggest competitive advantage and how custom software played a defining role in every win. Now I'm the CEO of Sonatify Technology. We are a custom software development company headquartered in Scottsdale, Arizona, with teams in the US and Latin America. Today, we are joined by a fun guest, Jeff Williams. Living in the DC area, Jeff has been a tech and security leader, entrepreneur. He's been the founder and CEO and is currently founder and CTO of his current company. Jeff, welcome.
Hi, Steve. How you doing?
Thank you for joining. Jeff, if you would, take our listeners through the journey of your career and what's led you to your current venture.
Yeah, well, I have to say my career in security started with a bit of a misspent youth. I was grown up in, if you saw the movie Hackers, that was pretty much me. Maybe not quite as cool, but
like hacking financial and wartime systems and all this good stuff.
It was more phone freaking stuff and blue boxes and cracking copy protection and modding games and stuff like that. But it was interesting. That's really how I got my start in computers, is like from the assembly language up, right? Started messing around with decompiling operating systems and so on. I was super popular in high school, as you can probably guess.
You knew how to find vulnerabilities in systems and exploit it. That's a powerful skill.
That's right. Anyway, so, I went into user interface design because I thought that was really interesting after college, but it was on a top secret classified project for the US Navy. And I accidentally got really enamored with building secure systems. And so I learned a lot about it and got recruited by a consulting company. I encourage everybody starting in their career to work for a consulting company for a couple of years and work with lots of different companies on their projects. And it's hard, but you'll learn so much
that you
become
to quite a bit,
incredibly
right?
valuable. And so I learned enough to be valuable to Fortune 500 financials and big companies like Nintendo and Southwest Airlines and insurance companies. And even the Federal Reserve, lots of places that I got a chance to work for. And then I started my own company to do application security services and built a consulting practice. One cool thing about that was very early on, we encountered this open source organization called OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Project. And it was super small at that time, just a small mailing list. This is like early 2000s. And they were going to start on this project to build a sort of a training environment, an online training environment for AppSec. And I had already built one of those for my customers. And I was like, well, if they build it, then everyone's going to use theirs and nobody's going to use mine. So why don't I just donate it to them and make it open source and try that? So I didn't know anything about open source at the time, but it turned out to be incredibly rewarding. And when we ended up participating with this OWASP group for quite a long time, and instead of spending a lot of money on marketing, we created new cool open source tools and documents and standards. And some of them took off and got incredibly popular, like the OWASP Top 10. And it just sent all the right messages about my consulting company. So I thought it was a really great way to do well by doing good. That organization is OWASP is still around. It's got 250 chapters worldwide and it's growing, and it's sort of the premier source of application security knowledge. I was the global chair for the first 10 years. And that was interesting growing an open source organization because it's completely inverted from everything you think you know about business. Everything is radically transparent. Everything is free. And there's really no limitations on labor because you got a volunteer workforce. So that was really interesting.
Very cool.
Anyway, what led to my latest company is sort of one of the research projects I was doing. I was thinking probably about donating it to OWASP, and it was about instrumenting applications to see if we could measure security or defend applications from within. And I remember the night I got it to work and I discovered a SQL injection vulnerability without doing anything, just by using the application normally. And I was on my couch in the middle of the night because I had little kids. And I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. And I'm the only one in the world who knows about this. And I decided not to donate it to OWASP. I decided to try to build a company and get some venture funding. And that led to Contrast.
That's fantastic. Now, I want to talk about contrast security, but I want to go back pre-show. You told me that you are passionate about basketball, boomerangs, and app AI security. We heard the app AI security part, and you also mentioned that you're 6'9" in your 50s and can still dunk. So
That is
I'm
all true.
guessing that's where the basketball, but give us some more background on that before we jump into your company.
Well, I played a little basketball in high school, but then in college, I rode on the crew team at UVA. And that was a good experience. I really learned a lot about, pushing myself and achieving
Being
things. And
not, I don't know much about crew, but being fine, that takes up a lot of boat space, doesn't it?
it does, but it's incredibly valuable because the longer
Okay.
your stroke is, the faster your boat goes. And
Okay.
so it's like basketball in that being tall is a huge advantage. And then I didn't go back to basketball until I turned 30. But I started playing then and I've been playing, and I don't know, about 10 years ago I got invited to play in a 50 and over championship and went down to Coral Springs, Florida, brought a team from Baltimore, and we won it. We won the national championship for 50 and over teams, which I
Nice.
was super excited about. I ended up winning another one a couple years later, and now I've been all over the country playing against teams from around the world.
That is amazing. I hit that 50 milestone mark, and the first thing I think is, oh man, I'm going to get hurt.
Yeah, there's some of that. There's always a couple injuries at the tournaments, but if you keep playing, you can keep playing. That's my motto.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Jeff. Tell us about Contrast Security. Tell us more about your company, who your typical clients are. Let's dive deeper into that.
So the truth is, most companies really struggle with application security. It's a tricky space because just writing code the normal way that you would write it is probably vulnerable. The security vulnerabilities like SQL injection and cross-site scripting and unsafe deserialization, they're all a little bit tricky. And so when developers write code in the naive way, they're just going to make those mistakes. And I don't blame developers. They've got plenty of stuff to learn. In fact, I always tell people I work with, I'm like, don't ever think that security moves fast because development moves incredibly fast. And so I'm really sympathetic to the problem. And the existing tools aren't really very good. Tools like SAST and DAST and SCA, all scanners, and even web
Mhm.
app firewalls, they all were developed in the early 2000s and they haven't really evolved very much. And so, like I mentioned before, we had this idea of instrumenting the application very much like an APM tool, like a New Relic or an App Dynamics, but
Okay.
for security purposes instead of performance. And by watching the application as it actually runs, you can learn an incredible amount about how that application works. We use it to generate application blueprints. We actually create a map of your entire application layer. We call it the contrast graph. And you can ask it questions like, show me all the applications in my finance division that are using Spring version whatever, and also have a vulnerable version of Log4j, or which ones have SQL injection, or which ones don't do authentication right. And it's a way of understanding the security across your entire application layer.
So I am not a security expert, Jeff. So educate me here. But is that unique? Scanning the application as it's running versus just scanning the code?
I think it's really unique. When you scan the code, you lose a lot of context. So if all you're looking at is one repo, and your application's probably built from a dozen repos and
Right.
100 libraries and a million APIs on the back end and all these different pieces. So when you just scan the code, you don't have the whole picture. You probably don't even have the app server or the runtime platform. And so you're just looking at kind of just the piece of code that you wrote. But there's a lot of other code involved, and you can't really understand vulnerabilities or attacks very well unless you can see the whole picture.
Gotcha.
And so by
Makes sense.
watching it run from the inside, we can see all the patterns and identify vulnerabilities and attacks much more accurately than you can do with traditional tools.
So, from a pure security perspective, in your comments, how most applications have vulnerabilities in them. Now, with AI assisted coding that is helping developers be more productive, what's your opinion? Is this making it better or worse from a security perspective?
Well, I think it's making it worse. I think, from my perspective, there's like a tidal wave of new code coming because developers are now, they're depending on who you listen to, from 20% to 400% more productive. And so, I think of like developers are now armed with AI and the
Mhm.
attackers are now armed with AI. because they
Right.
can use AI to generate attacks on your custom code. And so I think the security folks in the middle are not armed properly. They don't
Gotcha.
have the bandwidth to deal with that new level of code. And there's nothing wrong with AI assisted coding. I use it. I don't think I'll ever program again without it. But at the same time, you got to recognize it is not writing secure code. It was trained on insecure code, and it's probably producing just as many vulnerabilities as a human coder would.
Gotcha. No, makes sense. And, you do have to laugh. You have companies saying, I'm getting 400%, more productivity out of my engineers. All right. Well, then your engineers must really suck. Strong. The good engineers out there are seeing 10 to 20%
Yes.
productivity, integrating in an environment, and helping with a lot of tasks that were often manual, things like documenting, which every engineer hates to do. And so I laugh too when people make these absurd claims.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's if you use it correctly, it can be a benefit.
No
But
doubt.
I really think it's important to focus what you're asking of the AI. It's much better at little tasks focused on a specific part of the code, and it's not very good at like following architectural patterns and things. So it wrecks code. If you just let it go and just do its thing, it just wrecks your code until you've got a pile of mess that's, so fragile that every change you make breaks something.
Now, at this point in your career, are you still hands-on code?
Yeah, I like building little tools and doing things. They don't really let me touch the main product much, but if I can prototype, actually, like one of the really good things about using AI is that it's great for prototyping UX
No
stuff.
doubt.
And then I can give that to my team and then they'll really turn it into something scalable and performant and all, but at least it's a fast way of communicating what we want to build.
It's a big thing with CTOs, and as the organization grows, most started as coders and you evolve out of that. But if you're not keeping your hands on stuff, especially using AI and productivity, it gets harder and harder to lead the team of engineers doing it.
Yeah, funny story. A couple days ago, a reporter asked me about a new tool that CISA had released, the cybersecurity agency. So I was like, I should probably test it before I comment on it. So I went and I just fired it up and I looked at it. It's just a web page with a questionnaire on it. And I was like, wait a minute, this thing's written in Drupal. So I was like, that doesn't seem quite right. And I poked around and like I tried one vulnerability exploit to see if it was susceptible because my spider sense was tingling after decades of pen testing. And sure enough, bang, first shot, found a vulnerability. And I disclosed it to them responsibly. They got a bug bounty program. But like I still like to do that kind of stuff.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, what are some cool projects that your company's working on?
Well, one thing about Contrast is I'd say we kind of did it backwards. Like we started with the hardest part of the problem. Like we built these sensors that could detect malicious or inadvertently vulnerable behavior inside applications. And that was super hard. And we didn't focus a lot on like the last mile. The how do we get these cool findings to the people that need them through the tools they're already using and all that stuff, and really making Contrast delightful to use. And so what we've been doing for the last year is under this Project North Star that we created, which is to sort of rethink the workflows in application security for the AI era and for modern software development, modern pipelines, and for the SOC. Because we want to deliver AppSec insights directly into the SOC via, through the SIM and through runbooks and things like that. So it was actually a really interesting project. It forced us to rethink a lot of how our platforms work. And I think we came up with something absolutely fantastic. So I'm super excited about the UX aspect of it. And remember, I started in UX, right? So it's always been a passion of mine.
Awesome. Well, tell us about your software engineering team, your work model. Are you guys remote, hybrid? Give us some more insights there of this genius team continuously building out your platform.
Yeah, so we're a hybrid team. Contrast is about 10 years old. And so we've gone through a couple of different stages. And uh, I'd say when we were a startup, we were all co-located. Actually, my co-founder, we worked out of his mom's little apartment over her garage for
That's
about
like a
I
good
don't know,
Jeff
about a
Bezos
year. We had an office
story
there.
there.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And then we grew a lot after, raising several rounds of funding, and we grew. We were almost 400 people. And we had development teams in Ireland, we had one in Mexico, and a few teams around the US. And one of those things we ran into is you've probably heard of Conway's Law,
Sure.
that your software sort of starts to follow the organization structure. And I think that really bit us. So we had we called them products, but really they were features. And they should have all been part of one product, one platform. But instead, they were really kind of siloed and, sort of tracked the competition in the market, which wasn't really what we wanted to do. And so one big part of this North Star project is bringing our teams back together, restructuring, and getting people all focused on, sort of one primary product use case.
It's hard as you're growing, as you're bringing in capital, as you're rolling out new features, as you're scaling up and, how to make those adjustments and not lose that core strength that bonded the teams initially in the product.
Yeah, we made some mistakes. I mean, we made some decisions to, instead of creating a unified data model, we created multiple separate data models, and there was overlap and, disconnects between those models. And we told ourselves we were doing it to move faster, but ultimately we paid the price for that. And I would definitely not do that again if I had a chance to do it over again.
So is your current team, how many engineers do you have? Are you remote? Are you hybrid? How's, fast forward?
Yeah, we're hybrid. Most of our development team is in the US, but during COVID, we got rid of our offices. We went fully remote. And so we've got developers all over the place. There's a concentration near Baltimore where we started, but they're spread out all over now.
Gotcha.
We do get
Gotcha.
together once a year where everybody in the company comes in person, and we have, it's sort of a sales kickoff, but we also have an engineering kickoff at the same time, and we bring the whole company together. And that's been really, I think those are really successful events. Gets everybody aligned on our core purpose. We let teams get together whenever they want, actually. So if they want to get together and meet in person for a few days or a week or whatever, they can do that. But we have this one big company meeting, which has been super.
Nice. So as a tech leader, what's the biggest challenge you're facing now?
Well, let's see. I think there's a lot of in our market, there's a lot of cost reduction pressure. So we primarily sell to gigantic enterprises, major financials, insurance companies, entertainment companies, airlines, and so on. And they're in some cost cutting mode. They're reducing spend on a lot of things, and security tools are tough. So they're always looking to consolidate. They're looking to get a cheaper version of the same thing. And we ended up being, I think, a more expensive product than most of the other products on the market. And I think it was totally justified. Like, we were really a lot better. And ultimately we saved teams a lot more time. But when it comes to cost cutting time, it doesn't look great. It looks like we're more expensive. And so we actually, we were priced on a per application basis, which is the way most tools are sold in AppSec. And we're moving away from that. We're going to more of a consumption base where you pay for concurrent hosts and how much time is actually being used on Contrast. And so that's really exciting. That's revolutionary in AppSec space because we're like, AppSec is way behind most, DevOps, high-speed development kind of stuff. So I think this really is the future of AppSec, and it'll fix our pricing differential. It'll make us much more cost-effective to use.
Gotcha. Very interesting. And you're right. In the security tools space, you don't see a lot of consumption-based pricing models. You see it's per seat, per user. So it sounds like you guys are leading the charge there.
Well, we had this idea that the right place to do security is in production. And that might seem counterintuitive, right? Everybody says, oh, shift left. But there's pretty wide agreement now that shift left doesn't really work. In fact, Gartner published a paper that said shift left is dead. And the reason that it only works in production is that context problem I talked about before.
Right.
The farther you shift left, the less context you have. And so it's a little bit, again, like APM tools. APM tools started in the development space, but then people realized, hey, you're not testing reality. You're just testing, a staging system or something that's not real. You want to test in production where you've got, fully assembled application with real users and real data and real load and real backend connections. That's where you test performance because that's where it's real. And it's the same with security. You test it in production. It actually makes it a lot easier and faster to find those flaws because you're continuously testing everything. And then you feed those vulnerabilities to development super fast and let them respond to the ones that matter. That's like 5% of the stuff that the static tool with no context will report. You want to report the things that are real in production. And that's sort of the big shift that I see in AppSec is people want to focus on what's real and not waste time on theoretical static findings.
Very good. Well, Jeff, you're a guy that's accomplished a lot, certainly a leader in the security space. What are some brutal lessons you wish you would have learned earlier in your career?
Ooh, well, I mentioned earlier the sort of, listen to your users kind of feedback. I think the lesson that I learned was that it's really because I listened to my users say stuff, but I wasn't really thinking about it very hard. And they'll tell you what they think the problems are that they're having, but I really think it's a little bit like hacking. Like you have to reverse engineer what the real problem is. So for example, I would hear people say like, "Well, we're frustrated with false positives. We don't like long scan times," and they complain about the former generation of tools. But what we had to figure out was they don't want a better scanner. What they really want is security to just go away, to become invisible, part of the infrastructure. And
Right.
so we finally achieved that. Right now, you install Contrast in production, and you don't see anything except for incidents in your SIM where they should be, where the SOC can deal with them. And vulnerabilities, actually, we report vulnerabilities, but we create the PR for them. So really the way they surface is as PRs in your GitHub or GitLab or wherever, so that you can just hit accept and that's it. You don't have to run any scans. You don't have to, it's really not triage because we're reporting what actually happened in production. And so we have a lot of context to help the AI make a really strong fix.
Gotcha. Pre-show, you were talking about you were arguing with one of your Georgetown professors. Let's talk about that. That's a great story.
Well, so I got a job with one of my law school professors, a guy named David Post, and he was an incredibly smart guy. He was on the cover of Wired magazine, and
A Georgetown law professor was on the cover of Wired.
yeah, because his thing was about cyber law, and his argument
Okay.
was that cyber law needs a special, like a different set. He would say it's a separate jurisdiction than a territorial sovereign law. And so I worked with him, and we were building I was building the simulations for him so that he'd have some experimental data to report on. And we were having an argument one day, and I told him, "That's just wrong. I'm right." And he goes, "Well, go over in the corner and be right. I want to be compelling." And I was like, wow, I spent my whole career so far trying to be right. And he just upended my whole world. I was like, who cares if you're right? If you're all by yourself in the corner, you've got to also be compelling. And so I really started thinking about how to be more compelling and when giving talks and making arguments online and presenting things, to just try to be more compelling about things. And I think there's a lot of people, especially in security, that just think they're right and they're not making any damn difference.
And man, security is an interesting area where it has its ups and downs, where every company is focusing on it. And then it starts to, you don't hear a lot in the news and security
Yeah.
tools start getting cut, but all it takes is a few hacks out there and then it's a top priority again. Definitely an interesting space.
I mean, it's crazy. Just this week, there was the big hack where some hackers compromised some NPM packages, some pretty popular ones, and introduced some malware into them. So that then, if you were a website that used those packages would come from you, go down to your users' browsers, and start trying to access other things from within the browser. So they'd look for things like crypto wallets and things and try to steal money from within your browser. And that's just one of the kinds of crazy things that can happen if you're not doing AppSec really carefully.
So Jeff, I'd love your opinion on crypto and its ability to be hacked. With Bitcoin, I'm pretty biased on that. And that bias is probably, I've lost a lot of money because of it. I'd love to hear your view.
So, I mean, I love crypto. I taught in the NSA's cryptologic school for a number of years, and I think the algorithms are fascinating. I really enjoy. I read Applied Cryptography, which is a great book, and it goes through all these different scenarios of how you can use cryptographies in different ways. There's all these crazy things, like you can create systems for, like if you want to protect a treasure chest and you want to make sure that like 12 pirates want to split it up, but you want to make sure one of them doesn't take off with it. You can make like 12 keys, and you have to have 7 of them in order to open the trunk. There's all kinds of cool things, voting schemes and all that kind of stuff that you can do with crypto. It's incredibly powerful. I would say probably there are ways to crack crypto algorithms, and quantum is interesting. It's going to undermine the crypto infrastructure. So we're seeing a lot of big companies looking at how they can use crypto to how they can replace their old quantum unsafe algorithms with new ones. But I doubt that how you're going to get hacked is by somebody cracking the algorithm. It's much more likely that the way you get hacked is there's a software bug in your wallet, the software that you use to manage your Bitcoin, or
Right.
the SSL stack that you're using to transmit, that there's probably a bug in there that's not crypto related. It's just another flaw. That makes it just another security mechanism that can have bad code in it. And so it's, we're not tremendously good as a society at writing secure code, but yet we rely on code for everything that's important in our lives, right?
Yep.
Your money, your health care, your government, your defense, elections, everything depends on code, even your social life. It's all code. And so that's why I've sort of dedicated my career towards trying to improve that situation. And we could use a little help from the federal government. Like, the market is kind of broken. You can't choose between which online bank you're going to use based on which one's more secure, because how
Right.
would you know? So we need more visibility, more transparency in the market to allow those market forces to work. And, frankly, we're not really getting there. The government's not really pushing it. I mean, there was a little push to try to get people to disclose SBOMs, or software bill of materials, which is just a list of libraries that you have in your software.
Right.
And I thought that was a cool sort of baby step towards transparency, but we can't even get people to do that. So it's been, I don't know, 5 years at least now. People have been talking about SBOMs, and it's kind of not taken off.
Well, Jeff, thank you for getting uncensored with us today. Your passion for the tech and security world, tied with your knowledge and experience, is truly impressive. Before we wrap, what's some no BS advice you have for tech leaders out there who are trying to build, scale, or even just survive in these interesting times?
Well, let's see. I guess some advice I'd have for CTOs or software leaders is you don't really have to have all the right answers. It's much more about building a team and building consensus and getting everybody in your organization aligned on what you're going to build. I think for probably most of my career, I thought I had the right answers, but time humbles you a little bit. And so I think I'm still learning to listen and, try to build consensus among my team, but that's the challenge I'm working on right now.
Gotcha. Great advice, Jeff. Thank you so much. That's it for this episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm Steve Taplin. If you enjoyed the show, go ahead and hit subscribe. If you didn't enjoy it, did you hear all Jeff's capabilities and how he can expose your systems? You better like it, or we're going straight to your competitors. Remember to fail hard, win big, and always build what matters. See you next time.
That's a wrap. Another great episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun doing this show. I love talking with great tech leaders. As a side note, if you're interested, check out my new book, Fail Hard, Win Big. This is the story of how I built 30 companies, failed on 20, and turned 10 into multi-million-dollar wins. The common thread with all of them was custom software. Also, if you need software development help out there, my company, Sonatify Technology, we deliver world-class software development engineers out of Latin America. We have a solid track record of helping companies launch better products and faster. Thanks again for listening. Appreciate it and appreciate you.